Welcome to this webinar about business intelligence and how information technologies can be of support to boards of directors. It is a joint webinar of the European Confederation of Directors Associations and the governance intelligence provider, CGLytics. I'm Susanne Liljegren. I will be your moderator during the next hour. Digital technologies disrupt and transform the way we think, act, and organize ourselves at all levels of society and at lightning speed. How do we structure our business intelligence at board level? To cope with these challenges, what kind of support systems do we need? Will the work of boards of directors as we know it today also be disrupted and transformed into something else? These and many other questions will be answered by our panelists. Their biographies have been sent out earlier. Joining us from New York is Mr. Deepak Krishnamurthy. From Bern is Mr. Michael Hill. From New York, Mr. Aniel Mahabier, and from Vilnius, Mr. Rytis Ambrasevicius. Thank you for being with us today. I also want to extend a special welcome to all of you who have joined our webinar today. You will be in silent mode, but you're most welcome to put a question or a comment to our speakers. This is how you do it. Move your mouse towards the bottom of your screen and a Q&A button will appear. Click on the button. Write down your question or comment and tell me who you want an answer from. I'll pick questions after the last speaker. Before giving the floor to our first speaker, I want to inform everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be available through the ecoDa and CGLytics websites. Our first speaker is Mr. Deepak Krishnamurthy. He will talk about how digital tools can support our decision-making at board level. Deepak, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So really appreciate being here. So what I'm going to talk about here is a concept called the digital boardroom, which we think is very compelling for how boards are going to interact with each other and also govern better. So in the world that we live in today, we have access to a ton of data and information, and you have more and more data coming in from different sources. But at the end of the day, the boardrooms act in a very, what I would call, in a structured, paper-driven process, or even if it's an electronic process, it's still very structured data. The boardrooms get access to reports, presentations, PDFs, but then as a board member, like your ability to interact is very limited. So what are we trying to do with what's the digital boardroom? What's the concept of the digital boardroom? The digital boardroom is an ability for board members to have access to the full transparency in an organization of data. Now, this data is available in a way that is very secure, it's curated, at the same time it's interactive. So you will have, as a board member, a single version of the truth, and this single version of the truth comes in from the core ERP system, the general ledger, the financial reporting systems, even at some level, the CRM forecasting systems. Because then, like as a board member, you would have access to a tremendous real data that is not synthesized, that's not even created in a way that is supposed to tell a story, but you have access to the core data. Now, the idea for this digital boardroom is also as board members, most people need to have an opportunity to understand and interact with data, ask the questions, why is this happening a certain way? Why is my sales going down? Why is my cost of working capital increasing? What's going on with the people in attrition? Is there a specific problem in a specific region, geography, country that I need to worry about with respect to my HR, recruitment and attrition and the corresponding sales? So being able to proactively assess risk and understand what risks are is important. And also having an opportunity to go and navigate data, especially from a compliance perspective, and ask the right questions to the executive board or to the executive team is also important. So this concept of being able to access data in real time and in a way that is outside the traditional boardroom context, so that having an ability to interact with mobile, we believe is going to be the next way that boardrooms are going to interact with each other and also with the executive teams. So if you go to the next slide, the idea of this digital boardroom was actually something that our founder, Hasso Plattner, came up with back in 2009. And basically, the idea was that like it's one on the executive board level, like you have access to data, but also the supervisory board level, the same information is going to be available. So the idea of full transparency between the executive teams and the supervisory board was the whole idea of the digital boardroom vision going back to 2009. Fast forward to 10 years, if you go to the next slide, this is a current CEO, Christian Klein, presenting the digital boardroom to an external audience, but this is what he and our CFO would do in a traditional supervisory board meeting. We would offer this information on a real-time environment, and if a supervisory board member wants a specific question, you would, like CEO or the CFO would go double-click into that particular data and provide the transparency immediately. There's no more things like, oh, we're going to get back to you in a couple of weeks' time, or we're going to come back to you later today. The information is real time, and that creates a much different flow of conversation. It creates with the board, and the board has an opportunity to go and drill down on specific issues with the CEO, with the CFO, with the executive teams. Now, if you go to the next slide, so what's the how does this look like, right? So this is just a view of how a digital boardroom would look like. You could have this on your iPad, you could have this on your mobile, you could have this on a desktop. But the idea is that as a supervisory board member, you would see exactly what the executive team is seeing. So it's like, what's the growth rate in different regions? What's happening from a forecast perspective? What's happening from a deal scoring? What's the probability of like the forecast being hit? What's the guidance that the executive team has provided to the street? What's the risk in that guidance? Is there something that like should the company go and look at kind of pre-reporting earnings if there's a risk of not hitting the particular guidance? And then even like now things like pipeline. Now the reason why this is important is that you can as a board you can follow what's happening in a company, not just at the end of every quarter whenever the supervisory board meets, but also like on a monthly basis, just to understand what's the health of a company. And that's super important because then you understand what's going on a weekly, monthly basis, just to keep score in terms of what's happening with the company, and then understand the scorecard at the end of the quarter when the board meets. If you go to the next slide, I think the most important challenge that we see with respect to boardrooms is creating something like a digital boardroom is all about how do we bring data together in a way that is consistent. That's the single most important challenge that we face, and most companies face with respect to creating something like this. Now, obviously, there are tools to address some of these issues, but this is, for me, an investment that helps both the supervisory board and the executive board. And the reason why it's helpful is that if you can create a platform of bringing data in a consistent way between different sources, especially this becomes more tricky if a company has a number of acquisitions, if the company has different systems, legacy systems where it's hard to reconcile data, and then bringing the data in the same granularity and having a clean set of data is going to be critical. So that's something that we struggle with when we build the digital boardroom internally. That's what our customers that we see like struggle with, who are using our ERP systems and analytical tools to build these digital boardrooms. And that is probably the single most important source of challenge that we see. The second associated challenge is integration. The integration is it's a little bit more about technology challenge rather than a business challenge. So the integration is going to be, how do you bring together like data in a real time, on a near real time basis? How do you make sure that there's interactivity with respect to the underlying data, and you don't just have the summary data? And finally, in the next challenge that we typically see most of our customers facing is the fact that they have a tremendous amount of data overload, right? So once you build something like this, it's just the sheer amount of data could be overwhelming. So as a board, most people need to have a synthesized view, but then the critical questions is going to be, what's the comparison? How is the company doing with the competition? How are you doing with respect to the market growth rate? What are the key challenges that you're facing with respect to your risk? And it's good to have a 5 to 10 simple summary, kind of what I would call dashboards. And from those 5 to 7 summary dashboards, then there's an opportunity to go and get into the next level of interactivity. The other flip side of data overload is also user experience. So it's about how do you create the right level of user experience, whether it's in an iPad or a mobile or even a desktop, and make sure that the board members are engaged. One thing we have seen as we have gone through our journey with our boards is that we have, it's one thing to have these available on a desktop. It's completely different when this is available on a mobile device. We are seeing usage go off go on a hockey stick the moment we put the data, this information in a mobile device, on an iPad or iPad or iPhone or an Android device. So I think that helps really the driving user experience and interactivity. And then the last piece I want to touch upon is the fact that we want to be able to, I think as an executive team or anybody that's providing this to the supervisory board, change management is important. It's about making sure that people understand how to use the tool, ask the right questions, and also like how do you run a board meeting? A board meeting needs to be changed completely from a CEO or a CFO presenting the numbers to a discussion and interaction. And that's going to be the biggest part of the change management is that, okay, the information's all available. It's available in the pre-read like a week before or 2 weeks before, but then let's have a conversation. Let's have a conversation based on data and numbers, and then the richness of the conversations in the boardroom, you change the dynamic completely. So that's kind of the net of like everything. So this is going to be, if boards invest in it and companies invest in it, this is going to be game changing. So we think of that as an opportunity that every company should do. This is kind of the table stakes for me with respect to how information can be used in boardrooms, and then building on it, like, you can have AI, machine learning, and a bunch of other things that my other speakers are going to speak about will be covered. So that's kind of my overview of what a digital boardroom is going to look like.
Well, thank you, Deepak. That was really interesting, and thank you for explaining how we can use this real-time data during our board meetings, while at the same time avoid data overload, like you pointed out. But let's get the perspective of a professional board director and turn to Mr. Rytis Ambraskevičius. Rytis, what is your comment on what Deepak just said?
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting, and of course, I would like to learn much more than you managed to say during this short period of time. So, what is important actually in the board or for the board of directors is the sufficient information in timely manner, and it becomes a very big press on the management, because the board demands the sufficient, means that not too much, not too little information, and in timely manner. And time after time, we are asking even more information on specific one or another item. And then for the management, it's quite challenging to bring instantly that information from the either internal database or external sources and so on. So what I see, that type of the solutions could be very good tool, in order to make the board work much more efficient than it is today. Sometimes when we are discussing very important topic and we are analyzing the data, and then we see that we need some extra calculations, extra evaluations, then the management has to take at least two weeks for that. So next time we will be discussing, it will be in 2 weeks. 2 weeks today is really very long time. So I think it's a very good point just to think about for the future. So talking about such a solutions is about the reliability of the data. I see now on the screen that data as a board member, and looking at these numbers or any other information, I have to make a decision, and I will be liable for making this decision. But this data appeared and somewhere disappeared. When I have a paper and it's signed by someone, then I have evidence that I had that data at the moment I was making a decision. So this is just to think about for the future. I think we are not going to start this discussion now.
There will be much more discussions afterwards, I think.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Thank you, Rytis. Now let's move on to our next speaker, Mr. Anil Mahabir. He will explain how artificial intelligence impact the corporate world and boards of directors. Aniel, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Suzanne. So good day, everyone. First of all, thank you for your time today. Feeling very excited to co-organize today's webinar with ecoDa and to talk more about how artificial intelligence can support decision-making at board level and influence governance oversight. More specifically, if you can go to the next slide, in the next 10 minutes, I will walk you through how AI impacts the corporate world and our lives, enters the boardroom, and how boards can leverage data and artificial intelligence, including intuitive business intelligence tools, to sustain a competitive edge. We go to the next slide, please. So how does AI impact the corporate world and our lives? Artificial intelligence is already used by innovative companies like Google and Amazon for offering a more tailor-made experience to consumers by analyzing their preference or immediately replying to the questions through bots. This allows better services or products on a direct, fast, and inexpensive manner, making these companies more competitive. We also see this in the professional services sector, where we see legal and admin work being replaced through automation of manual and critical tasks or robo-advisors in the financial sector. A survey done by the Harvard Business Review last year found that 75% of 250 CEOs questioned believe that the use of cognitive technology will transform their organizations within 3 years. This impacts the way these organizations operate, their processes and designs, along with how they are governed. It's aimed to streamline operations, creating efficiency, influencing business strategy, and impacts the workforce. Although these developments are great and innovative, they do bring corporate governance challenges with them. I think some of them we already heard when Deepak was explaining how you can leverage data in boards and take more informed decisions. Some of the challenges are the average board is not technology savvy, or technology as a key competence is underrepresented. And it requires a different supervision and risk oversight of companies deploying artificial intelligence. You can go to the next slide, please. So we already see that some companies have introduced AI in the boardrooms by installing AI board members to interpret vast amount of data, identifying patterns, and help make more informed decisions. For example, Deep Knowledge Ventures, a Hong Kong-based venture capital firm, appointed an algorithm to its board, granting it the possibility to make investment recommendations and votes, becoming the first company to do so, I believe, in somewhere in 2014. Similarly, Salesforce uses a robot called Einstein at its weekly executive meetings to analyze data and critique senior management reports. By using algorithms, it reports in real time whether or not an executive's targets are likely to be met. At the moment, Salesforce is rolling this application out to the market. In 2016, Tieto, a Finnish software company, became the first European company to appoint a bot named Alicia T to its management team, also with the authority to vote. You can go to the next slide, please. So, with the speed of changing happening today, driven by technology innovations, the changing business environment, along with increasing activism and ongoing media campaigns, having the right information on a timely basis from the start can help boards stay ahead and prevent embarrassing headlines which materially impact the value of the business they oversee and their own reputation. To prevent the mistakes made in the past, good governance and oversight are only possible when information and data being used to make judgments is full, accurate, forward-thinking, and is available at the same level of detail to all players equally. With AI and today's business intelligence tools, boards can now access more data sources to get a much better picture of what's going on, learn from the past, and how the context of the organization is changing and influencing decision-making process. By introducing innovative business intelligence tools and AI in the boardroom, tedious and time-consuming admin tasks will be off the director's hands, allowing them to be more focused on more important business aspects, such as the company's future strategy, and prevent short-term acts. For instance, whether a merger or an investment should take place, AI instantly analyzes a plethora of data, will suggest the optimal decision while considering the relevant regulation. Boards can see how they compare in real time against the industry peers and where they have a competitive disadvantage. AI becomes a lever for the board to make important independent business decisions. Generally, when a decision is made within the board, it's based on the information provided by its company management and executives. This creates a high dependency and influences the decision-making process. In addition, with the heightened scrutiny of governance practices in the post-financial crisis era and in a world where investors are becoming more emboldened at holding companies to account for their failings, on matters such as, for example, board composition, diversity, and executive pay, it's important that boards and executives can easily access the same data and information as the investors and stakeholders. This requires corporate issues to make material investment on the data analytics capabilities to be ahead of the game. That was my short presentation, Suzanne.
Okay, thank you, Aniel. I'm wondering when I hear this, do we really need directors in the future? Or can we all rely
that's a good question.
artificial intelligence to make all the decisions at a high speed? What do you think?
I definitely think so. Because one of the challenges currently that we have with AI is the way it's being programmed, right? So AI is based on looking at historical data sets, identifying patterns, taking a wide set of data sources into account, and then predict basically what the possible outcome could be. So it helps staff to make better informed decisions. What it doesn't do, it doesn't take really the empathy, the empathic, and the social component into account, which clearly, a director can take that into account by taking multiple different aspects in its decision making. So I see AI much more as a complementary functionality for supporting boards.
Well, Aniel, it's not just that we as people, humans, can have other aspects when we make the decisions, but it's also that we have the responsibility. I'm sure that artificial intelligence cannot be sued.
Absolutely, that's another challenge, right? So if you look at corporate law, it's only natural persons that could be sued, and not software.
Well, thank you very much, Aniel, for helping us understand how artificial intelligence can support decision-making at board level. Ritis, you heard Aniel say artificial intelligence can improve governance at board level. What is your reaction? Is this the way forward for boards of directors?
Yes, thank you, Aniel, and thank you, Suzanne. It was really very interesting presentation and a lot of good ideas and insights. So continuing with his presentation, I would really like to have some kind of assistant, not someone will be replacing me, but assistant in the form of the lady employed by Tieto in a Finnish company. So I really think that could be very useful, and not because of the lady, but because of the knowledge she has and ability to analyze different data. So this is one thing. Another point is that I want to underline that what is the challenge nowadays all over the world, actually, in the boardroom, is the demand to analyze a lot of data and to make decisions fast, and at the same time to bear full responsibility on that. And if you have been analyzing what is the current situation with the liability insurance, so the insurers are not happy because a lot of claims are from the shareholders and all of the stakeholders. What does it mean? That I'm, as a board member, I have to be as much as possible sure that based on this data, I'm making the best solution that will be suitable for our company at this moment. So this data analytics and all other tools are very important and will be even important tomorrow in the boardroom because of the faster and because faster decisions we will be able to make, and these decisions will be much higher quality. So, but on the other hand, is also kind of question. We were making some research, and we asked what would make you comfortable to trust artificial intelligence. So top 3 concerns or answers were understanding how the system works, and it will be very difficult in reality. Ability to control the data that system operates with, and the third, usage of the system by people you trust. So the data, people, and how its system works. It will be a challenge for the boards to adopt these solutions, but nevertheless, it's the future. I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Rytis. Before we move on to our next and last speaker, I think it is time for all of you in the audience to interact with our speakers. We will do it through a poll, a survey. We want to know the focus of your company when it comes to using artificial intelligence at board level. What is most important? Is it to create scenarios or help with strategic decision making? We will now launch a poll so that you will see it on your screen. What is the focus of your company when it comes to using artificial intelligence at board level? Is it to release decision makers from doing analysis and predictions? Or is it to augment the competencies of the board? Please fill it out now. Click on the most important focus of your board when it comes to using artificial intelligence at board level. After the next speaker, we will have the results from you. Our last speaker is Mr. Michael Hilp. Michael will guide us into tomorrow's work of boards of directors. Will the governance models change? And if so, how? Michael, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Susan. Also, thanks a lot to Anil and Babek for the great presentations. Very interesting. I think it's, I fully agree with you. It's pivotal that the boards really knows how to embrace data as a decision-making tool. We can move to the next slide, please. So what I'm trying to focus in my 10 minutes will be actually looking a little bit outside the boardroom and ask ourselves, how do data-driven technologies, how do they change the way companies operate? And as a result, how does the governance needs to change? Can move to the next slide. So we'll really try to look at Horizon 2 and 3, meaning looking at the really impact of those technologies on how companies operate and how the board should function. Let's move to the next slide. Now, I would say there are, I think, two technologies which have really changed and are still changing the way value is being created in today's and probably tomorrow's economy. The one we have heard before, AI, which have had a great impact on recreating the new platforms and platformizing economies, which led to the value capturing, shifting from those who manufacture goods to those who actually match, suppliers and consumers, those who match, different parties in this, what we call now these ecosystems. So we definitely have seen the shift from what we can say value chains to value hubs. You'll know nowadays kind of economy, it's dominated by the big platforms, be it the Googles, the Amazons, the Tencents, Alibabas of this world. Now I would say the second big shift, which we, I think, observing at the moment and probably will see much more in the years to come, I would say it's the decentralization of those platforms, which is mainly driven by technology like DLT or blockchain as usually called. And what we're seeing there that, probably the days of the centralized platforms might be over, that we might have new kind of players coming in or new groups of players coming in, kind of taking a major role in the economy. So just to illustrate these different types, if you take the payment industry, which is a very timely matter, as you know, when you read the newspapers, we definitely have moved away from, the banks, controlling it. Now, the platforms like Alipay in China, which is a major role, and now we have the emergence of Libra, where it comes or not, nobody knows, that's an open question. But still the concept behind Libra, it's very much kind of a decentralized platform we should try to create. And I'm sure we'll see many very similar kind of trends, developments in other industries to follow, beyond just payments and finance. So let's probably move to the next slide. Now the big question will be if this hypothesis is true, so we kind of see a shift from value chains, value hubs to value webs, what does it mean for governance? So how are these new value architectures being governed as such? And what we probably can see or probably already observe from today, that in this kind of systems, the network becomes much more important. You still have companies, which will be governed, based on hierarchy, based on instructions within the company. You will have markets, where you're going to trade goods and services. But I think a major impact on those ecosystems, will be kind of data which will move between different players, and data will have an even bigger value and kind of a bigger role in making those ecosystems function. Now, if you're now a member of a board of director of a company, who is used to, control the company, who kind of manage a company where you can give instructions, where you have full control of what's going on, and you're moving into an ecosystem where suddenly you're one among many players, you're one company who has to interact, who has to partner with many other players in that field. I think your role as well is going to change in the long term. So let's move probably to the third slide. And I would say, I think there are probably three, implications for board members if this is going to happen, what we're kind of observing at the moment. I think the first implication, in my view, is that it's very important that any board member of any company really understands what will be the value architecture of the future for the particular company. So how is a company going to create value, in 5 or 10 years, if it will be part of a bigger ecosystem, of a bigger network? And most importantly, I think with this first implication will be to get somehow an idea or a debate, at least on board level, how much of this value will be created within the company, and actually how much will come from outside the company, how much will come from partners who collaborate, in this ecosystem. Secondly, I think in this first implication, again, board members need to think about how can we actually move the company from where we are now and, where we want them to be in this new value architecture. And that's, the normal transformation task, which I think might be even, more challenging for many companies given the disruptive nature of this change. I think the second change, which we foresee, is as well that, if you're in such an environment which will be highly dynamic, which will be multi-stakeholder, you have many partners, you have to make choices, you have to make bets, whom you're going to collaborate with, whom not. I think it will be very difficult to apply what I would call a more deductive thinking, in decision-making, where you kind of have clear hypotheses and then you kind of try to find evidence to support that, which actually assumes that you know a lot what's going on, in the context and know the history very well. I think in such context, you probably have to shift more to a more inductive way of analyzing situations and taking decisions, which again is very much in line with what Aniel said before, with the machine learning approach. It's a very pattern recognition approach of thinking to kind of be able to recognize trends before others do and to take decisions very quickly. And thirdly, I believe, in this world of distributed power, we will also see a shift that, boards cannot anymore kind of impose decisions, but rather they have to influence others that, decisions are being taken, also outside the company. So I think companies have to become much more open for collaboration, for being part of consortia, for kind of, delegating part of the value creation and decision-making to other groups of companies. At the same time, also be open to welcome, members of other companies or partners to the boards in order to really be fast enough to take decisions needed in this more complex context. So to sum up, I would say, yes, data-driven technologies have huge implications as they provide huge opportunities for companies. But I think they also require that the board is not only kind of trying to understand what's going on, but also kind of trying to challenge their own way of working and trying to challenge, how actually they should govern the company and value creation as such. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Michael, for giving us this glimpse into the future of governance and make us better prepared for the changes to come. And I'm, of course, thinking again about the responsibility when we have more of an influencing approach than a decision-making approach. But that's for something else to discuss later on, maybe. Again, I want to turn to you, Rytis, to hear your comments on what we just learned from Michael about decentralized collaboration, about the future of governance.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It was very, very kind of important to hear all these insights and views to the future. And I very much agree that it's the future, or even maybe tomorrow we have to take this into consideration now in real life and in the businesses. So what I see that in the current boards, we have a challenge to understand all these platforms and all these nets and webs and so on and so on. And that is the biggest challenge. What I see currently in the boards, that when it comes to the IT related topics, it's like it's not the boards, it's like a lower level topic. Nevertheless, it's a very, very big mistake. So one, from the risk management or risk governance point of view, another angle is from the opportunities point of view. So I used to tell quite often that the success of the company lies in the strategic opportunities and managing with the strategic risks. So here are plenty of opportunities. We are, even all of us, we are not still realizing how many opportunities, and maybe they are not discovered yet, but they will be discovered tomorrow and after tomorrow. So for the challenge for the board as such is and will be to change the mindset of thinking about what is the business model, how we are creating the value for the shareholders and all other stakeholders and so on. So this is, I think, is very important topic. So either you are learning by yourself or with help with others, you should be replaced by the shareholders. Otherwise, you will not be contributing to the value as the shareholders are now demanding, and they will be demanding tomorrow even more. So this will be my comment.
Well, thank you very much, Rytis. And I would like to ask you this question, Michael, again about the responsibility, because we have seen during the last years a flow of more corporate governance laws and regulations, at least not the least in the European Union. So if we are in a different situation like you are describing here, with the governance models changing into us being less of a decision maker and more like influencers, how will that play with the hard law?
I think it's a very good question, because what we see now the regulators actually trying to regulate the centralized platforms. But now actual challenge, that's over. I think that the age of centralized platforms that we have seen now we're moving into decentralized platforms. But regulators usually, it takes some time for them to really adapt to the new realities. And I think in time of this time gap, before regulators really come in and come up with the solutions, I think it's the responsibility of companies to think ahead, to act responsibly, and also anticipate, what society is asking them. We've seen it with the topic of data. I think those companies who anticipated that society will put a lot of emphasis on the privacy of data, those companies actually have done pretty well the last couple of years. Those companies who ignored this social expectation, they're running into deep problems. And I think the same will happen here again. Companies need to anticipate before regulators come in, what does society expect from them and how to behave.
So basically what you're saying is more of a self-governing system, soft laws and things like that, rather than hard laws.
I think that's what probably reality will be, because that's like the regulators take time to really embrace these new changes. Therefore, at least the next couple of years, I think companies have to act on their own, have to practically, do the right thing, and by doing so, also probably avoiding, hard laws kind of, coming in and destroying value, which you sometimes see these days in all the discussion around decentralized platforms.
Well, very fascinating future outlook. I think we have a few questions here also from our audience. We have one from Laurent. He's asking, and I think it's Aniel that will be answering this. Artificial intelligence, it will help, but as said during the last intervention, how to ensure reliability on data? Artificial intelligence is a black box. How is data validated? So, Aniel, do you want to kick off and start answering that question?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the key things to understand with artificial intelligence / let's say sentiment analysis is that it takes the vast majority of data from multiple sources. So there's not one source where it leverages and understands what the patterns are. It looks at multiple sources, and based on those multiple sources, it allows you to predict basically what the potential outlook will be. So when it comes to being able to validate and the accuracy of the data, I think the key thing to understand with artificial intelligence is just not relying on one data source. It relies on multiple data sources. It therefore also automatically looks at a validation itself and makes a prediction based on what they think, you know, the most possible accurate outlook could look like.
Okay.
If I may add a comment on this one. So I think the historical way of AI has been, it's been a black box, but there's a lot of research and also new kind of startups that are focusing on explainable AI. So I think AI is moving more and more away from a black box. I think it's going to take 2 or 3 years for fully explainable AI to be available in the market, and then you can understand why AI made a decision and not just what decision it made. So I think it's something that for everybody to keep in mind, that this is AI is a black box, is obviously the current state, but explainable AI is something that's going to happen very quickly in the future.
Thank you, Deepak. Anyone else wants to give a comment? Michael?
No, I think I fully subscribe to that. I think we have seen, in particular pressure from society and as well business partners that, you know, this ethical dilemma needs to be solved with AI. And I'm also, you know, fully with Deepak. I think the industry is working very hard to offer solutions to overcome this ethical dilemma. And I'm also very confident, you know, that this will arrive at solutions which will be very acceptable, I think, for everybody, and will also allow, you know, further progress to be happening.
Mm. Well, thank you very much. We do have another question from the audience. It's Martha who's asking this. Isn't there a risk of overflooding the board and directors with information and making them focus more on analyzing the past results than on discussing the future and strategic issues? And I think, Rytis, you might want to comment on that.
Yeah, I already replied. But I replied in the way that efficient board, not maybe a regular board, an efficiently working board should concentrate on the past up to 20% of its time. Usually it is even 10%, because what is past just to learn the lessons from the past. And then the rest of the time, 80 or 90%, we are looking to the future, means the building the strategy, overseeing the strategy implementation, and so on and so on. So it depends on the board as a collegial body, as the team, how they much concentrating on these, you know, numbers, and it's, you know, very nice and funny and so on. So I saw a lot of such type of the boards. So unfortunately, it depends on the particular board only.
What about you, Deepak? Have you thought about this when you're discussing your tool for digital boardroom?
Yeah, so most of the tool, the way the tool is being used, at least in SAP, is more for forward-looking than backward-looking. It's to understand, I think the information is more for the past in terms of, okay, these are the numbers, these are the results. But as we go look into, let's say, the strategy that Rytis was talking about, I don't know whether it's 80%, I think it's probably more than 50% from what I've seen so far, is about, okay, what happens if, on a competitive side, if the competition do certain things, what would you do? Then the discussion is about strategy, and then the data in the boardroom is a validation. So for example, if our CEO or CFO would say that, okay, this is what we're going to do for this competition, to beat this competition, or to like, you know, defend our position, then the board can then ask the next question, okay, like, how can you do this when your market share is X and the competition is Y? So it enriches the discussion. It's not always backward looking, even though the data is there, but every decision is data driven. It's fact based. And because the data is right there, you're not just talking in theoretical terms, you're talking with real information, growth rates, trend lines. So it helps in talking about strategy. So use the data not for looking backwards in terms of what happened last 6 months, 12 months, and trying to design, like, you know, why things went wrong, but use it for looking forward to design the strategy and advise the company.
Thank you very much. We do have several other questions here from our audience. Thank you very much, audience, for being so active. I have one here from John. Important business deals are often very simple. You write them down on your napkin or cigar box. Well, what about that? Can artificial intelligence help us with out-of-the-box creative thinking or only with big data operational analysis? That's an interesting question. Who would like to kick off here?
I like napkins, but I'm not making business decisions based on the napkins. Sorry. Maybe I'm not so modern, I would say. No, speaking seriously, I was working in telecommunications, in the energy business, in the infrastructure, in the finance, and so on. So I would say that without the real data analytics and the efficient data analytics tools, you will not be able to survive in the competitive world. I mean, the competition is absolutely extreme now, and I believe that it will be even more extreme in the coming years. So without the data analytics, it's you know, to give some kind of idea, yes, but nevertheless you have to check. Either you are taking the risk to invest in that idea, and then let's see what will happen. Okay, if you are taking that risk, it's fine, but nevertheless, to make the real decisions that will bring a maximum value, you should take the kind of advice from the data analytics.
Okay, let's ask about let's ask Aniel. What about can artificial intelligence really help us with out-of-the-box creative thinking? Aniel?
Yeah, so let's take a step back into what I think the audience was asking. Look, I think, you know, doing business does sometimes require at a stage where you're trying to close a deal, and those deals are sometimes closed on a napkin. And so it's how things sometimes go. Having said that, before you get to that stage, a lot of work is being done. A lot of work in terms of understanding what the deal actually is and how it will impact and how it will generate value. I think that's where you deploy, whether it's artificial intelligence or whether it's having access to very smart business intelligence tools to allow you to understand the wider context, do a deeper dive in analysis, and then being able to get to a stage where you can actually use that napkin and make a proposal.
Okay, but out-of-the-box creative thinking from artificial intelligence, that's not really possible, right?
It depends on what you mean with out-of-the-box creative thinking, right? So what it does is it gives you a wider set of data and analytics to make a good decision. So one could say that it widens your scope and it widens your thinking, and therefore could become out-of-the-box thinking. But that's the way I would look at it.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think we're talking about two different things. Out of the box is just one idea and the single idea. When you have many options and many ways to go, which way is the best? That the analytics helps.
Correct.
Thank you very much.
If I may just add one, just one comment on this. I think the out of the box creative AI can't come up with out-of-the-box creative ideas. I don't think it can do that. But AI and like managers or executives together can come up with an out-of-the-box creative idea. I think like you can have one reinforce the other. So things that like people, managers, humans would not have come up by themselves, like unless like they were a creative genius. AI helps people become creative genius. So that's kind of how I look at it. AI can help executives become creative geniuses by providing them tools, helping them identify patterns that they don't see, coming up with some creative options and scenarios that like they wouldn't have come across if you point to the right, if you point the AI to the right problem. So it's more and rather than like AI exclusively operating to come up with creative ideas.
Well, talking about the artificial intelligence, I think that we now have a result from our poll. Do we have that result from our poll right now that we can see? Yes, here we go. What is the focus of your company when it comes to using artificial intelligence at board level? Well, the majority of the audience, or not the majority, but anyway, the biggest portion of the audience said to enhance strategic decision making, and the least is to release decision makers from doing analysis and predictions. So interesting result, I think. Let's hear the comments from our experts. Aniel, what is your take on this result?
I actually would say, yes, it's an interesting result, but it's pretty much aligned with what we've been discussing over the last 50 minutes or 45 minutes. So it's good to see that the audience is in agreement with that it's actually supporting long-term decision-making, meaning strategic decision-making, and that it helps to augment the board's competencies in overall intelligence. So it sounds like the audience is in agreement with how we've been describing the innovation that's taking place in companies and at board level.
Okay, let's move on to you, Deepak. Are you surprised by this result?
No, it's consistent, like what Anil said, right? It's I think I want to emphasize the fourth one, augmenting, right? I think the core part of AI is going to be it's augmented intelligence. It's not artificial intelligence. So we talk a lot about artificial intelligence and the fact that you think AI is artificial, it's operating on its own. I think the role of AI is augmented intelligence to help the board overall, to help the board in either strategic decision making, number A, or overall intelligence in terms of and understanding risks and things that like it's hard. Like now, in the way I like what Michael talked about in understanding the value architectures in the data age. AI is going to help that because it's going to. We live in such a complex world where we don't really understand the dependencies and how things are interrelated and how risk can cascade down the value chain. AI will be able to identify and pinpoint where risk is and help augment the corporate board's competency in this, that you spend more time looking on the future and not looking in terms of, okay, where is the problem?
Well, Michael, what is your reactions when you see the concerns of the boards of our audience?
I think what I really find very interesting, actually, we have quite an equal result. So people really see AI as a multi-purpose technology, not just something to be used, as a technical tool, but actually to have an impact across the work of the board. And I would say that's also very much in line, if I just want to introduce a little bit of the legal perspective as well. In most jurisdictions, the board is actually required to take the best possible data as a basis for decision, to arrive at good business judgment. So that's the good business judgment principle, which is very important in many jurisdictions. And therefore, I think in the future, the board needs to prove that they've taken all possible means of arriving at decisions, be it AI, be it other ways of dealing with data, that they've really looked at all angles of a decision. And I think AI will become an important part of that. And therefore, I think the boards really need, it's not just can, they need to take AI into account to make sure they don't run into troubles and suddenly will be, be standing in trial as, accused of not actually done everything to arrive at the best possible decision which they are required by law.
Thank you. And Rytis, is this in line with your expectations and your experience?
I would say that I was expecting to see more answers to the, answers A, yes, enhanced strategic decision making, because this is the, I would say, the core activity of in the boardroom, that to make strategic decisions. And seems that the level of this answer is not so bigger than, let's say, D, the augment corporate board competences and overall intelligence. Intelligence I more or less understand, but corporate the board's competence, I don't know if you are getting already the final results from the analytics. So where you see your competence is growing so fast, I would say. So I do not. So my feeling is that, my expectation was that it will be more about decision making, strategic decision making.
So you're not surprised, in other words, but
a little bit. I see that this is the biggest, 37% out of 100, but I was expecting that it will be 50 or even more.
Yeah. Well, we do have another interesting question from the audience. It's from Ingvild Huseby, who's asking, from my perspective, the most interesting area in artificial intelligence is the connection towards Internet of Things. all things connected to internet, securing enormous amount of data from other industries in your value chain, real time, and what this means for new business models, revenue streams, and disruption. And she's asking, can the panel share their reflections on how the board can work differently to secure the strategic direction for the company in such cases of Internet of Things and artificial intelligence? So, Deepak, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I think the IoT, the Internet of Things, and the data that's coming in, connecting partners, value chain, supply chain into your company is probably the single most biggest disruptive disruption that's happening. AI is a tool and that's going to help analyze the data and make decisions, but the connectivity is critical. Now, I think you're going to come up with scenarios where I think the boards need to think radically differently in terms of what the strategy is. Like, now, who are your partners? What do you do with the, like, now, are you going to work with your partners? Are you going to compete with your partners? Are you going to work with your competitors or partner with your competitors or compete with your competitors? Because you can't, at the end of the day, things are going to become more and more connected. You will have to rethink the strategic direction, because ultimately, if you are living in an Internet of Things world, it's about data and data and data. And connectivity and the more data you have, the better decision making you can do, and better pricing you can do, the better understanding of customers. So I think the biggest challenge with the IoT, at least from what we have seen in our boardroom, is the business model question. What is the ultimate business model for the organization? What is how are we going to work with our competitors, or how do we work with our partners? Do we compete? Because a lot of times what we are seeing is also our partners are trying to become our competition. And how do you react to this world? Because they are also trying to go after the same set of value pool of customers. So, and I think it's less about AI and IoT as a technology. It's more about the business model of a company. You go from a B2B scenario to a B2B2C scenario, business to business to consumer. What do you do? What competencies do you need to build out? Can you actually play that role? Do you want to, does your profit pool shrink? Does your margin profile look different? Do you need to raise more money from the debt market or capital markets? Those are the questions that become very interesting in this world.
Thank you, Deepak. And I think this leads us definitely to Michael again, because you were talking about the collaborative models, and that Deepak is also talking about the same thing. So what is your take on this question about artificial intelligence, Internet of Things?
Yes, I fully agree with the previous speaker. I think IoT will lead to an immense increase of data available. And I think the big challenge will really be how to turn IoT to what is called IOV, so Internet of Value. So how to turn all this data, which we're going to collect, into real value. And again, as I said before, I strongly believe that data will be, I think, the currency of all these partnerships in the future. So I think the company who has the right data and knows which data actually they need and they have, and what's the value of those data, they will be able, to interact with other partners and actually form, winning partnerships and coalitions and alliances. And therefore, I think it's very important for the board of directors to really understand, what kind of data we have, what we need, what's the value of those data, and what do other partners want, what do they need, what they can provide. And I think this, again, it's still a long way to go to arrive there, but I think this very much requires from the board of directors to get a good understanding of the data assets of companies. And therefore, AI and other technologies can help a lot to create this transparency, and also kind of make sure the board, is always aware what they have and how they can use those currencies in any kind of interactions with other business partners.
So thank you very much, Michael. And thank you, Aniel, Deepak, Michael, and Ritus for providing us with your expertise. After this webinar, I think we as board directors are ready to use digital technologies in our work with business intelligence. Our hour is up, and we will shortly close this webinar. But before we end, I want to inform our audience that you will all receive the slides of the speakers by email. Thank you all for participating in this joint ecoDa CGLytics webinar, and goodbye.